Ethan Vale stepped out of the sleek human starship and onto the smooth silver landing platform of Xyler Prime. The air was different here, thin with a faint hum that seemed to vibrate through the bones. He glanced around, taking in the alien city. Towers stretched high into a lavender sky, their surfaces smooth and reflective, catching the light of the twin suns. Floating vehicles glided silently between them, leaving trails of shimmering energy. Despite the beauty, there was an unmistakable feeling of control. Every movement, every object seemed deliberate, precise, almost perfect. Ethan adjusted his suit and took a careful step forward. He had come as a diplomat, but more than that, he had come as a human being capable of seeing things differently. His reputation preceded him, known for solving problems that no one else could, thinking in ways the aliens might never expect. Yet he felt the weight of the moment. This was not a place where mistakes went unnoticed. The Xylarian Empire was known for its strict rules and the absolute control of its royal family. One misstep could mean disaster. As he walked along the platform, a group of Xylarian aides approached. They were tall, slender, and elegant, their skin shimmering in subtle colors that shifted under the light. Their eyes were large, dark, and reflective, making it hard to tell what they were thinking. They spoke in a melodic tone, their words translating perfectly into his earpiece. "Ambassador Vale," one of them said, bowing slightly. "We are honored by your presence. The royal procession awaits you." Patterns shifted and moved across the surfaces, almost as if the building itself were alive. The corridors were empty of ordinary citizens. Only palace guards, rigid and motionless, stood at precise intervals. Everything seemed perfectly controlled. Everything except the way he felt a strange presence watching him just beyond his sight. They brought him to the central hall, where the royal audience would take place. He stepped onto a raised platform, and his eyes immediately fell on the crowd of Xylarian nobles. Their clothing was intricate, made of light-reflecting fabrics that seemed to float around their bodies. Their faces were calm, unreadable, as if emotion itself was forbidden. But then his gaze landed on someone else, someone different. The alien princess, Lyria. She was seated slightly apart from the rest, her posture perfect, her face serene. Yet when her eyes met his, she froze. Not a flicker of surprise, not a slight adjustment, just an unbroken stillness, as if the world had stopped for her. Ethan felt it immediately. It was not fear. It was curiosity, recognition, a spark of something deeper. The palace seemed to shift subtly around her, as if the very air had taken notice. The nobles around her glanced briefly at her reaction and quickly looked away, careful not to disrupt protocol. Ethan, calm as he could, returned her gaze steadily. He had learned over years of negotiations that sometimes the first impression mattered more than the words spoken. A single look, a single gesture could communicate volumes, and in that moment he understood that the princess had seen something in him that the others had not. He did not know what it was yet, but he knew it mattered. The ceremony began. A Xylarian elder spoke in their melodic tongue, welcoming him to their empire, praising the alliance between their worlds. Ethan listened carefully, noting the subtle gestures and expressions that accompanied the words. The aliens relied heavily on nonverbal communication, far more than humans did. One wrong movement could mean disrespect. One correct one could earn trust. He smiled slightly, adjusting his stance to mirror a subtle nod from the princess. She remained frozen, yet he sensed the faintest easing in her posture, an acknowledgement only he could interpret. After the formalities, the nobles were dismissed. Ethan was escorted to a side corridor where he could meet the princess more privately. The palace was vast and labyrinthine, corridors branching in every direction. He moved carefully, eyes scanning for anything unusual. It was then he noticed a figure standing at the far end of the hall just outside his peripheral vision. The silent watcher. The watcher said nothing. It did not move, yet Ethan felt its awareness as clearly as he felt the floor beneath his feet. Every step he took was observed, every glance noted. It was as if the being could see not just him, but his intentions. Humans were unpredictable, chaotic even, but the watcher was trained to understand every nuance. Ethan made a mental note. This figure would be important. Finally, he arrived at the princess's chamber, a room filled with soft light and simple elegance. Unlike the rest of the palace, it did not feel rigid. There was warmth here, even in its alien design. Lyria stood by a window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When she turned to face him, she was no longer frozen, but her expression remained unreadable, calm, yet tense. "Ambassador Vale," she said in perfect common, the language humans spoke across interstellar space. Her voice was soft, melodic, but carried a weight of authority. You are unusual, she paused, as if testing the effect of her words. Most of your kind would not survive a day in this palace without causing offense. That is often more important than speaking. I do not wish to break any rules, Your Highness, only to understand them and perhaps help where I can. From there, one could see parts of the palace that were otherwise hidden, private corridors, the movement of couriers, subtle signs of tension among the nobility. This is where I watch, she said, gesturing to the view. I see the Empire's heart and its flaws. Few can enter this space. You are one of them. Her gaze held his, steady and unwavering. Do you see what I see? That is rare, perhaps dangerous for you, but interesting. I do not fear observation. I only fear misunderstanding, and I think I can earn your trust. Ethan felt the thrill of the challenge. This was no ordinary diplomatic mission. This was a test of wits, perception, and courage, and he, a human, had been chosen not just to survive it, but to shape it. They stood together in silence, watching the palace below. The twin suns cast long shadows across the silver corridors, and the Empire seemed alive in its perfect, controlled way. Yet amidst the rigidity, there was unpredictability, something only humans could bring. And in that moment, Ethan knew the truth. He was no longer just an ambassador. He was a participant in a game that could decide the future of two worlds, a silent observer who had been noticed by one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy. And he was ready to play. Ethan woke to the soft glow of Xylar Prime's twin suns spilling across the walls of his temporary quarters. The room was minimal but elegant, made of smooth, reflective materials that seemed almost alive. He stretched and ran his fingers along the edge of a table, noting the subtle vibrations in the crystal surface. Every detail of this world felt deliberate, as if the palace itself were alive, observing him. Today, his schedule was even more complex. He was to meet with the princess again, but he had learned that in Xylarian culture, time was flexible when it came to high-ranking nobles. Plans were suggestions, and opportunity often depended on who noticed what when. Ethan had learned early to move with patience, and patience was something humans had in abundance. He stepped out of his quarters and into the corridor. As he walked, he felt it again, the silent watcher. The figure was always present but never close enough to interfere, always observing but never speaking. Ethan had studied its posture yesterday, and now he saw small things he had missed before. The subtle flex of its fingers, the tiny movements that betrayed awareness, even the faint pulse of its breathing. Humans were not always predictable, but the watcher seemed to think it could anticipate him. Ethan smiled slightly to himself. That would soon change. His guide appeared, one of the palace aides, a shimmering figure with delicate features. "Ambassador Vale," she said, her voice smooth and calm. "Princess Lyria requests your presence. She will see you in the private observation chambers." He had learned quickly that the Xylarian Empire relied on constant surveillance, but it was subtle. Unlike human technology, there were no screens, no cameras, only watchers embedded in the environment, trained eyes, and finely tuned senses everywhere. When they arrived at the observation chamber, Lyria was already there. She stood at the window, gazing at the city below. For a moment she did not speak. Ethan waited, studying the patterns of light and shadow on her skin. Her composure was flawless, but he could sense tension underneath, like a spring compressed just beneath the surface. "You observed carefully yesterday," she said finally, without turning. "The silent watcher does not act without cause. It is loyal to the Empire, yet it questions in silence. You have noticed it. Few humans would. Humans are rarely predictable. By listening, by understanding patterns, by thinking ahead. It is a skill humans have. We adapt quickly, and we see connections that others miss." With a subtle press, she opened it to reveal a narrow staircase descending into the palace's underbelly. It was a section of the building rarely used, filled with the hum of hidden machinery and faint light patterns along the walls. Ethan's curiosity was piqued. "This is where I watch the inner workings of the Empire," Lyria said quietly. "The nobles trust appearances, but the real story is here. I see how information moves, where control is strong and where it falters. And yet," she hesitated, "even I am limited. I cannot act openly. Humans are unpredictable, yes, and that is both their weakness and their strength. You see patterns, but you do not always follow them. You act in ways others would not expect. Perhaps that is why I invited you here." It had followed them, staying just outside the stairwell, motionless and observing. Ethan felt the presence keenly. The watcher's training was apparent, every muscle controlled, every micro-expression suppressed. It could strike without warning, and yet for now it waited. Lyria noticed his glance. "Do not be afraid of it," she said softly. "It does not act unless it perceives a threat." And yet, her voice trailed off as if weighing the right words. "Even I cannot fully predict its decisions. It is loyal, but it respects capability, perhaps even courage. That is why you are here. The Empire is vast and its rules are rigid. Many within it would exploit weakness if they could, but they do not anticipate humans, not fully." There were no buttons or switches in the human sense. It responded to gestures, focus, and intent. Small adjustments in position and attention caused the panels to shift, revealing new displays of palace activity, couriers, and hidden passages. "Show me what you can see," Lyria said, stepping back. Ethan raised his hands slightly, instinctively aware of the environment. He let his mind focus, watching the patterns of movement on the displays. The courier's routes, the guards' shifts, the subtle timing of doors opening and closing. He saw connections, patterns that even Lyria had not noticed. "This area near the east wing," he said, pointing at the display. "Two couriers cross paths regularly at odd intervals. It looks like chance, but the timing is too precise. Someone is manipulating information there. We see the cracks others ignore." Its presence was imposing, silent, and utterly still. "Let it watch," he said. "Observation does not equal attack, it only measures, and measurement can be used." Ethan felt the hum of the palace around him, sensing the subtle vibrations of unseen machinery. "This is where the Empire hides its truths," Lyria said quietly. "Few dare enter these spaces, and yet the Silent Watcher has seen you enter. That is rare. Most outsiders are invisible to it, or they are stopped before they reach this far. Or perhaps prepared. Humans are not easily intimidated by what they cannot see." Lyria pointed out couriers and guards, noting subtle deviations in their routines. Ethan watched, analyzing, connecting dots, predicting movements. Every detail mattered. Every pattern told a story. "Do you understand why I brought you here?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "You want someone who sees beyond the surface, someone who can act when others hesitate. Someone who can recognize threats before they become disasters. That is human strength. And now you have stepped into it. And knowledge is the greatest weapon we have." And in that delicate balance, a human stood, unafraid, attentive, ready to face whatever the Zalarian Empire could throw at him. For Ethan Vale, the real journey was only beginning. Ethan could feel the palace beneath them, a living network of paths and signals, almost like the Empire itself was breathing. He and Lyria moved quietly through the shadowed corridors, careful to avoid the gaze of couriers and guards. The Silent Watcher remained somewhere behind, its presence almost a weight in the air. Every so often, Ethan could sense it, analyzing his movements, calculating, judging. "This part of the palace is rarely used," Lyria whispered, her eyes scanning the walls. "Only those trusted by the inner court know these halls exist, and even fewer know the truth hidden here. There are factions within the Empire, some loyal, some ambitious, and not all are visible. Some operate in ways the royal family cannot detect, manipulating messages, moving forces, controlling outcomes without ever appearing." He had seen it on Earth, in governments, in corporations, in conflicts where knowledge mattered more than strength. Here, in this alien empire, it was the same principle. Knowledge could destroy or protect, and humans excelled at seeing what others tried to hide. "Then we must find the source," he said. "If information is being manipulated, we need to trace it, understand who benefits, and stop it before it spreads further." The Watcher was trained to neutralize threats quietly, but it had rules, and those rules were designed to protect the Empire, not necessarily the innocent. They reached a junction where the corridors split into multiple hidden paths. Lyria paused, touching a subtle marking on the wall. The stone shifted slightly, revealing a narrow passage that led downward. The air here was cooler, damp with the faint scent of minerals. Ethan stepped forward cautiously, noting the subtle vibrations in the walls. Every pulse, every hum could carry information if one knew how to read it. "This passage leads to the information hub," Lyria explained. "Not many know it exists. From here, the factions manipulate couriers, messages, and signals. If we can access it, we can see the truth." Walls lined with glowing panels displayed streams of data, tracking movements, communications, and subtle manipulations across the palace. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. He had seen human data systems, military networks, corporate command hubs, but this was beyond anything he had encountered. And yet the principles were familiar: flow of information, control of knowledge, manipulation of outcomes. Look carefully, Lyria said. Most of the Empire would see only numbers and light, but you notice patterns. Do you see it? He spotted two couriers crossing paths repeatedly, just as he had predicted in the observation chamber. But now he saw the hidden threads connecting them, messages intercepted, altered, delayed. Someone was carefully controlling information to influence decisions in the court. I see it, he said, pointing. These two couriers are not working independently. Someone is coordinating them. Look at the timing and routes. They're too precise. Whoever is doing this knows the palace systems intimately. We notice the cracks that rigid systems cannot hide. That may complicate things. We improvise when rules fail, and we think 2 steps ahead when others rely on protocol. He began connecting dots, mapping the flow of messages, the paths of couriers, the subtle delays that indicated manipulation. He noted the timing of security patrols, the way messages were rerouted, the hidden codes embedded in communication. Each observation added a layer to the picture, revealing not just a conspiracy, but the motives behind it. Look here, he said, pointing at a sequence of signals. This is deliberate. Someone wants a specific outcome. They manipulate messages to influence decisions at the highest level, and they rely on the predictability of others, but they cannot predict humans. But be cautious. Any mistake here could be deadly. Ethan realized that the Watcher was not merely loyal to the Empire, it respected skill. And in this room, Ethan's skill was being tested. Lyria gestured toward a console. This panel controls access to the main communication streams. If we can trace the origin of the manipulation, we can expose it. But it is guarded by layers of security, both technological and personnel. Few have succeeded. We see possibilities, connections, patterns that rigid systems cannot account for. Lights shifted, panels revealed hidden streams of data, pathways of information previously invisible. He traced the threads, noting anomalies, inconsistencies, hidden reroutes. Step by step, he began unraveling the manipulation. The silent Watcher stepped closer, just enough to be noticed, its gaze never leaving Ethan. It did not interfere, but Ethan felt the weight of its judgment. This was a being trained to act decisively, to eliminate threats without hesitation. And yet it had chosen to observe, perhaps even to learn. This is it, Ethan said quietly. The origin of the manipulation. Whoever controls this stream controls the outcome of decisions in the court. If we expose them, the Empire can regain balance. If we fail, his words were careful, measured. Failure was not an option. Lyria stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. I trust you, but you must understand this is dangerous. Once discovered, the faction will strike quickly. And the Watcher, she hesitated, the Watcher may act, but not against me, against you perhaps. Observation is not threat, he said calmly. I act with care, skill, and intelligence. You can measure that, but you cannot prevent it without reason. It had not approved, nor had it denied. It had only noted, and that was enough. Ethan returned to the console, finalizing his tracing of the manipulated streams. He had uncovered the key nodes, the couriers, and the hidden controllers. The pattern was clear, and the source revealed. Lyria studied the results, her expression a mixture of relief and cautious hope. You have done what few could, she said softly. You see the Empire as it is, not as it appears. You understand the truth hidden beneath the surface. And yet, she looked toward the silent Watcher. The journey is far from over. Others will notice anomalies. Others will act. Humans excel at that. Or perhaps humans are simply capable of things others cannot imagine. And the human had proven that courage, intelligence, and observation could uncover truths even the most disciplined aliens could not. The game was only beginning. The hidden chamber fell into silence after Ethan traced the manipulations in the palace's information network. The glowing panels reflected in his eyes, but he barely looked at them now. His mind was working faster than ever, piecing together the patterns, understanding the movements of the couriers, the hidden signals, and the faction trying to control the Empire from the shadows. Lyria watched him closely, her calm composure showing the slightest tremor of anticipation. This is more dangerous than I imagined, Lyria said quietly. The faction controlling the information is clever. They are not just ambitious, they are ruthless, and they know almost everything about this palace. We use observation, strategy, and the ability to predict what others cannot. It will act if it perceives a threat. That would be too risky. Instead, we must manipulate the information back using their system against them. We need precision, timing, and understanding. That is our strength. The system responded to focus and intent, almost as if it could sense thought itself. He began to trace the flows of information again, identifying weak points, gaps, and timing errors that could be exploited. The more he studied, the more he realized how the faction had assumed rigidity in the Empire. They relied on the predictable behavior of couriers, the precise protocols of the palace. Humans did not work that way. "This is perfect," Ethan whispered. "We can reroute key messages, create delays, and introduce subtle errors. The faction will notice, but they will not realize it is deliberate until it is too late. And the Watcher," he glanced toward the corner, "it will see the skill and perhaps hesitate to intervene. Observation alone cannot act against ingenuity." Ethan focused on the task, his mind moving faster than the glowing panels. He identified the messages that carried the most influence, tracing their routes through the couriers and the hidden nodes in the palace. He noticed subtle anomalies, hidden signals embedded in normal communication. These were the faction's fingerprints, proof of manipulation. "Here," he said, pointing to a node on the display. "This is the main control point. If we disrupt it subtly, we can redirect the flow without raising alarm. The couriers will continue their routes, but the information will reach the intended recipients differently. We can counter their manipulation. And you can do this without them noticing." The Watcher's presence was a challenge, not a threat. Its awareness was a test, and Ethan intended to pass it. "Prepare the diversions," Ethan instructed Lyria. "We will need couriers to move as expected while the messages are rerouted. Timing is critical. If even one signal is out of place, the faction may detect the change and react." The palace seemed to pulse around them, alive with the flow of signals, yet they remained undetected. Hours passed in tense silence. Every movement, every adjustment had to be exact. Ethan's human ingenuity, combined with Lyria's intimate knowledge of the palace, allowed them to stay ahead of the faction. The silent Watcher remained in the shadows, observing, yet it did not intervene. Perhaps it recognized skill when it saw it, or perhaps it was waiting for a misstep. Finally, Ethan traced the last manipulated stream and adjusted it. The key messages had been rerouted, the faction's influence neutralized for now. He leaned back slightly, exhaling. "It is done," he said quietly. "The information is no longer under their control. The Empire can respond accurately. We have not threatened the Empire directly, only corrected manipulation." It simply observed, testing his reaction, measuring his skill. "You are bold," a low voice said, startling him. It was the Watcher, and yet its words were controlled, almost measured. "Few outsiders act with such precision. Fewer survive the observation intact. Observation is valuable, but it does not threaten. Observation is not fear, it is preparation, and preparation allows action without error. But the Empire is not safe yet. Others will notice the changes, and they will act. You have disrupted their control, but the struggle is only beginning. But you must understand, Ambassador, the risks are greater than you imagine. Even skill may not be enough if the wrong person discovers your actions. That is why we survive and why we succeed." The palace seemed almost alive, reacting to their movements, yet they remained unseen, unnoticed, and unchallenged. Finally, they paused, stepping back from the console. The information network flowed smoothly, with the manipulations corrected and the faction's influence neutralized, for now. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of their success. "You have done what few could," Lyria said softly, her expression a mixture of relief and admiration. "You have changed the balance of power in the palace and perhaps in the Empire itself, but," her eyes flicked toward the shadows where the Watcher stood. "The challenge is far from over. Others will notice and others will act. Humans do not wait for danger to strike. We anticipate, adapt, and overcome. That is our strength." Within, secrets had been uncovered, manipulations exposed, and a subtle balance had shifted. Humans had shown their ingenuity, their courage, and their ability to see beyond what others could. The Empire had noticed, even if silently, that a new force had entered its midst. And for Ethan Vale, the journey was far from over. The palace was quieter than usual that evening. The twin suns had set behind Xylar Prime's lavender skies, leaving the city bathed in soft, glowing light. Inside the grand corridors, only a few guards moved, their steps precise, controlled. But Ethan Vale knew the silence was deceptive. Power in this empire was rarely as it appeared. He could feel tension vibrating in the walls, in the hum of hidden machinery, in the subtle patterns of movement around him. Every signal, every courier, every watchful eye had its purpose. He stood beside Princess Lyria in the hidden observation chamber. The faint glow from the panels cast soft reflections across their faces. They had spent hours planning, tracing every manipulated message, predicting every potential response from the faction that sought to control the palace. The silent watcher remained just outside the chamber, observing but not interfering. Its attention was like a weight pressing against Ethan's mind, yet he remained calm. "Everything seems in place," Lyria said softly, her eyes scanning the streams of information. "But you must understand, once we act openly, the consequences will ripple. The faction is clever. They will try to regain control. We expose the truth, show the manipulation, and give the Empire a chance to respond correctly. And action must be precise." They reached the main communication hub, the heart of the palace's information network. It was larger than the hidden chamber, filled with glowing panels, data streams, and intricate conduits carrying signals throughout the building. The faction's influence was concentrated here, its control most apparent. "This is it," Ethan whispered. "The source. If we act here, the balance of power will shift, but it must be subtle, precise. Any sudden move could alert them before we complete the exposure. Timing is critical. We will use that against them." The silent watcher observed, silent and still, but its attention was sharp. It could act at any moment, yet it did not. Ethan sensed that the watcher recognized his skill, that it understood the precision of human thought, the combination of observation, prediction, and adaptation. Suddenly, a panel lit up, signaling a breach. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The faction had noticed an anomaly. They were attempting to regain control, but Ethan had anticipated this. He moved quickly, adjusting flows, blocking access, and redirecting the signals to reveal the manipulators. "They are trying to fight back," he said calmly, "but they cannot anticipate all variables. Their control relies on predictability, and humans are unpredictable." It was a high-ranking operative from the faction, likely sent to regain control manually. Ethan acted without hesitation. He moved through the corridors, intercepting the operative with swift, calculated steps. He did not strike. Humans rarely relied on brute force. Instead, he used position, timing, and the element of surprise. The operative stumbled, caught off guard by Ethan's unexpected approach, and froze. "You should not be here," Ethan said calmly, his voice carrying authority. "Your actions have been observed and countered. Step aside or face exposure." After a tense moment, he retreated, leaving Ethan free to continue. Back at the hub, Ethan and Lyria coordinated the final steps. He traced the last manipulated streams, exposing the faction's hidden nodes and revealing the extent of their control. Messages that had been altered were corrected, couriers returned to normal routes, and the palace's decision-making processes regained integrity. Lyria's eyes shone with relief. "You have done it. The faction's influence is exposed. Their manipulations cannot continue unnoticed." Ethan did not flinch. The watcher had observed everything, calculated every move, and now seemed to acknowledge the human before it. "You have acted with skill," the watcher said in its low, measured voice. "Few outsiders would succeed, fewer would survive the scrutiny. You have proven your capability. Humans use them with precision and judgment. That is why we succeed. You have changed the balance of power in this palace, not with force but with mind and strategy. That is remarkable, and it is why I trust you." Couriers moved, messages flowed, and the Empire's systems resumed their function, corrected and intact. The faction's manipulations had been exposed, their influence neutralized. The silent watcher remained, vigilant but silent, as if observing the future rather than intervening. Lyria turned toward Ethan. "You have not only succeeded, but you have also earned respect. The Empire will notice your abilities, even if quietly, and perhaps humanity itself will be seen differently hereafter." They could see patterns, act decisively, and overcome challenges that rigid systems failed to anticipate. That was why he had succeeded. "Humans are capable," he said simply. "We adapt, we think, we act, and sometimes that makes all the difference. The Empire has seen your capabilities, and I believe it will not forget." The palace seemed peaceful, almost serene, yet Ethan knew the world had changed subtly. Power had shifted, knowledge had been revealed, and a human had proven that intelligence, strategy, and courage could alter the course of an alien empire. The silent watcher observed them one last time, its presence a silent acknowledgement. It had tested him, measured him, and recognized his skill. There was no word of approval, no declaration, only the quiet certainty that humans could influence events in ways the Empire could not fully anticipate. Ethan turned to Lyria. The faction has been neutralized for now, but vigilance will always be necessary. The Empire is vast, and power is rarely simple. You have shown that even a single human can make a difference. That is inspiring. Secrets had been revealed, conspiracies exposed, and the Silent Watcher had observed a human in action. The Empire had seen, quietly and without fanfare, that humans were not to be underestimated. And for Ethan Vale, the journey was not over. But he had proven a truth that would resonate far beyond the walls of this palace. Courage, intelligence, and adaptability could change outcomes that seemed impossible. Humans were a force to be reckoned with, unpredictable and unstoppable when their minds and hearts worked together. And in the quiet, still moments of the palace, one truth remained. The galaxy had begun to notice.